Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a big question inspired by Samuel Arbesman's book, Overcomplicated. Why do the systems that run our world, things like finance, the internet, feel so impossibly complex? And more importantly, what can we actually do about it?
So let's start with a specific day, July 8th, 2015. Out of nowhere, United Airlines grounds its entire fleet. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange just stops trading. And to top it off, the Wall Street Journal's website goes completely dark. Now, you can imagine the first thought on everyone's mind. This has to be a cyber attack, right? A massive, coordinated takedown.
But it wasn't. The real reason was almost weirder, and honestly a lot more unsettling. There was no mastermind, no shadowy hacker. It was just a bunch of random, unrelated glitches, a cascade of failures. And that brings up a really scary thought. What if the problem is that nobody, not even the people who built these things, truly understand them anymore?
Well, there's actually a name for this new reality we're in. The computer scientist Danny Hillis calls it the age of entanglement. It's this idea that we've spun a technological web that's so incredibly intricate that we ourselves have gotten tangled up in it.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, you gotta understand the difference between two words, complicated and complex. Imagine a big pile of buoys just sitting on a dock. That's complicated. Yeah, it's intricate, a lot of parts, but it's static. It just sits there. But now, throw those same buoys into the water. Suddenly, they're not just a pile anymore. They're interacting with the waves, the wind, each other. That's complex. It's dynamic, interconnected, and totally unpredictable. And that's the key. Our technology has basically jumped off the dock and into the water.
And that is the essence of the entanglement. It's the moment we reach a point where no one person can possibly hold the whole blueprint in their head. You might have an expert who knows their little piece of the puzzle inside and out, but nobody, and I mean nobody, can see the whole picture anymore.
This new kind of complexity completely changes how things break. Think about it. Back in the day, a disaster like the Challenger space shuttle, tragic as it was, had a clear cause. Physicist Richard Feynman famously showed it was a single faulty O-ring. One cause, one effect. But fast forward to something like the Toyota unintended acceleration issue. There was no smoking gun. Instead, investigators found a messy, tangled web of problems buried in millions of lines of software code, all interacting in weird ways.
So the big question is, how did we get here? Right? Systems don't just become this messy by accident. It turns out there are these powerful, almost invisible forces that are constantly pushing our technology towards a state that engineers have this just fantastic name for. They call it a kludge. You know what a kludge is, even if you don't know the word. It's that home entertainment setup you have, the one held together by a spaghetti monster of wires and 3 different remotes. It's cobbled together, it's not elegant, but hey, it works. Now here's the scary part. Imagine that, but on a global scale. Our most critical infrastructure, the things we rely on every day, are becoming giant kludges. So what's driving this? Arbesman points to 3 main forces that create this mess. First, there's accretion. We just keep piling new stuff on top of old systems without ever starting fresh. Second, you get interaction. All those new and old parts start talking to each other and interfering with each other in ways nobody ever predicted. And finally, you have the edge case. This is where you have to account for every single weird, rare, 1 in a million possibility, and you do that by adding another rule and another layer and another, until the whole thing is just impossibly dense.
You want a perfect, non-digital example of this? Just look at the US tax code. It started simple enough, but through decades of accretion, adding rules, and dealing with edge cases, adding exceptions, it has exploded into this monster of over 74,000 pages. There isn't a single person on the planet who knows all of it. It's literally impossible. Okay, so the systems are a mess. That's part 1 of the problem. But here's part 2, and it's a big one. It's not just about the technology, it's about us, our brains. The very things we're using to try and understand all this, well, they have some serious limitations. We're just not wired for this level of complexity.
Let me give you a quick example. Try to make sense of this sentence. The dog, the stick, the fire burned, bit the cat. Yeah, your brain just kind of short-circuited, right?
It's actually a grammatically perfect sentence. It just means a dog bit a cat that was beaten by a stick that was burned by a fire. Our minds just can't handle that many nested layers of information. It's called recursion. A computer, on the other hand, figures it out in a nanosecond.
So that little hiccup our brain has with a sentence, it becomes a massive, uncrossable chasm when we're talking about technology. Take a relatively simple computer program, just 1,000 lines of code. The number of possible paths it could take when it runs is, well, it's 10 with 30 zeros after it. Trying to test every single one of those possibilities isn't just difficult, it's physically impossible. You couldn't do it in the entire lifetime of the universe.
So I know this all sounds pretty grim, like we're doomed to be overwhelmed by our own creations. But there is a way forward, and it's actually pretty optimistic. The thing is, we can't go back. We can't just make everything simple again. That ship has sailed. So what has to change is not the technology, but how we think about it.
So if the old way of thinking, that traditional engineering mindset, isn't working anymore, what exactly does this new age of entanglement demand from us?
The argument is that we need a major shift in our approach. We need to move away from what you might call physics thinking and toward biological thinking. Now, what does that mean? Well, physics thinking is all about finding elegant, simple laws. It's the classic joke where the physicist says, "Assume a spherical cow," to make the math easy. Biology, on the other hand, can't do that. It has to look at the real cow, the messy, lumpy, weird, gloriously complicated real cow.
And this makes a ton of sense. Well, you realize our technology today acts a lot more like a living thing than a perfectly designed machine. I mean, it evolves over time. Think of all that legacy code. It's full of kludges and hacks that are just good enough to work. It even has what you could call vestigial features, parts that are left over from a previous era, like the giant thorns on a honey locust tree that evolved to fend off mammoths, which, aren't around anymore.
So what's the solution? We have to become field biologists for technology. We need to get out there and study our creations in their natural habitat. A great example of this is Netflix. They have this program they built called the Chaos Monkey. Its only job is to run around their systems and break things on purpose. Why? Because that's the only way to see how the system really behaves under stress, and that's how they learn to make it stronger.
Okay, so once we start adopting this biological mindset, it leads us to one final really powerful idea for how to live in this complex world we've made for ourselves. When we're faced with technology we can't possibly understand, we usually default to one of two extremes. There's fear, this thing is going to destroy us, or there's blind awe. This thing is perfect and can do no wrong. The problem is, both of those reactions shut down our brains. They stop us from being curious. But there is a third path, and that path is humility.
And this kind of humility, it opens the door to a really specific and beautiful kind of pride. There's a Yiddish word for it, nachach. Nachach is that deep, swelling pride a parent feels when their child goes on to achieve things they never could, when their kid surpasses them.
And that leads us to the final challenge, the big question. Can we learn to feel notches for our own technological children? Can we be proud of the incredible things they can do, even if, especially if, we've reached the point where we don't fully understand how they do it?
Because this humility, it isn't about giving up. It's not passive surrender. It's an active way of being in the world. It's what lets you be curious without being afraid. It's what lets you be amazed without just worshiping something blindly. And that's the sweet spot. That's the mindset that allows us to keep tinkering, to keep learning, and to keep making things better.
Look, we're not going to uncomplicate the world. The entanglement is here and it's here to stay. Our technology is definitely a mess. But maybe it's a glorious mess. And so the real question we're all left with is this. How can we learn to live and even thrive in the middle of this glorious, complicated, wonderful mess we've made?